Somewhere, right now, someone is looking at their own last name and wondering if it makes them Roman. For centuries, the answer seemed obvious. It doesn't. That single sentence undoes more family history than most people are prepared to lose. And yet it isn't the end of the story. It's the beginning of a much stranger one, because what the DNA actually shows is not that these families have no connection to Rome. It's that the connection was never the kind anyone assumed. For generations, a Latin-rooted surname functioned almost like a certificate of descent. Families in Italy, Spain, southern France, and parts of North Africa carried names built from old Roman titles, military ranks, or the vocabulary of the Republic and the Empire, and the assumption passed quietly from grandparent to grandchild. This name means we come from them. From the founders. From the city on 7 hills. It felt like proof, because it had the shape of proof, old, formal, unmistakably Latin. Historians didn't discourage the idea. Genealogists built family trees around it. It was a clean story, and clean stories are comforting. Rome expanded outward for centuries, so of course Roman blood expanded with it. Of course the name and the ancestry traveled together. The story held for a long time. Then researchers started actually testing it against the genome, and the tidy version of events began to come apart at the seams. The first sign of trouble wasn't dramatic. It came from something almost bureaucratic, the mismatch between how names move through history and how genes do. A surname passes down because someone, at some point, decided to use it and pass it on. That decision could come from ancestry. It could just as easily come from law, from religion, from a legal act that had nothing to do with blood at all. Genes don't care about decisions. They only care about who actually reproduced with whom. That distinction turned out to matter enormously. When geneticists began comparing Y chromosome data, the genetic material passed almost unchanged from father to son. Against the surnames men carried, they expected some correlation. Names moving down the paternal line should track loosely with genes moving down the same line. Instead, they found men with unmistakably Roman surnames whose Y chromosome lineages matched populations that had lived in Iron Age Europe long before Rome existed as more than a cluster of hill villages. Others carried lineages tracing toward Anatolia and the Eastern Mediterranean, regions that supplied Rome not with settlers, but with soldiers, slaves, and merchants absorbed into the empire's vast administrative machine. The name said Rome. The Y chromosome said somewhere else entirely. That was not a contradiction. It was a signal. Because in the Roman world, a name was frequently a legal event, not a biological one. When an enslaved person was freed, they often took the family name of the household that had once owned them, a name with no biological connection whatsoever. A foreign-born soldier who served decades in a Roman legion could be granted citizenship on discharge, along with a fully Roman name, discarding whatever name his own family had used for generations before him. An entire household in Gaul, Iberia, or North Africa could become Roman on paper within a single generation, while everyone in it remained, genetically, exactly what their ancestors always were. If a story like this keeps surprising you, that's the point. Subscribe, because the deeper the DNA record goes, the less linear human ancestry turns out to be. To go beyond the Y chromosome, researchers turn to autosomal DNA, the genetic material inherited from every branch of the family tree, not just the paternal line. Autosomal data is messier to read, but it tells a more complete story, because it carries fragments from mothers and grandmothers as well as fathers, diluted but never fully erased across generations. When modern individuals carrying old Roman surnames were compared against ancient DNA recovered from burial sites across the former empire, the pattern that emerged was almost the reverse of what the old story predicted. Many of these families showed autosomal ancestry overwhelmingly shaped by the population that had lived in their region long before Rome ever arrived, not by any specific genetic signature traceable to the city of Rome itself. A family in southern Spain carrying a name derived from a Roman military rank looked, genetically, nearly indistinguishable from neighboring families whose names carried no Roman echo at all. The name had traveled the length of an empire. The ancestry, in many cases, had barely moved. At this point, 3 explanations competed for the strongest evidence, and none of them fully explained the pattern alone. The first was cultural adoption without genetic replacement, Roman identity spreading as a legal and linguistic status through citizenship grants and freedmen naming customs, largely independent of any large-scale movement of Roman bloodlines outward from Italy. The second was limited elite migration, a real but modest movement of Roman colonists, administrators, and retired soldiers who did settle permanently in the provinces, intermarried locally, and left a genuine, if diluted, genetic trace, stronger in some regions than others. The third was multidirectional movement across the empire itself, soldiers from North Africa stationed in Britain, merchants from Syria settling in Gaul, enslaved people relocated across provinces thousands of miles from where they were born. Under this model, Roman ancestry was never a single stream flowing outward from one city. It was hundreds of separate streams, crossing and recrossing an empire that spanned 3 continents. None of these explanations was wrong on its own. The evidence increasingly suggested that all 3 were operating at once, in different proportions, in different provinces, at different centuries of the empire's long life. The turning point came when researchers gained access to larger ancient DNA panels, genetic material pulled directly from burial sites in and around Rome itself, spanning the earliest Iron Age settlements through the height of imperial power. This wasn't modern data being compared backward through assumption. This was Rome's own population, speaking for itself, layer by layer. And what it revealed reframed the entire question. Rome, even at its founding, was never genetically uniform. Long before the legions marched anywhere, the city sat at a Mediterranean crossroads, absorbing people from across the Italian peninsula, from the eastern Mediterranean, from North Africa. Ancient genomes recovered from burials at the height of the empire showed individuals with ancestry matching the Levant and the Aegean buried alongside those with deeply local Italian ancestry, sometimes within the very same cemetery. Rome was never a single bloodline that later spread outward as an empire. Rome was already a convergence of peoples before it finished conquering anyone else. Not the ancestry researchers expected. Not even the direction they expected it to point. The surname didn't preserve a bloodline running back to a genetically uniform Roman founder population, because that population never existed in the way the old story imagined. What the surname preserved instead was something else, a moment when a family or an ancestor of that family became legally and culturally Roman, inside a city and an empire that had always been a meeting point of distant peoples, not a single expanding lineage. That is bigger than one family's genealogy. It suggests that identity, the kind stamped permanently into a name, was never a reliable stand-in for ancestry, not in the Roman world and arguably not in most large, mobile human societies. Names carry legal history. They carry the memory of allegiance, of survival, of a moment when someone aligned themselves with power because they had to, or because it opened a door that would otherwise stay shut. They do not carry a clean genetic signature, no matter how ancient or formal they sound. Picture a dry hillside in what is now southern France, sometime in the 2nd century. A retired soldier walks a ridge lined with pale limestone and old olive trees, terrain that has barely changed its bones in 2,000 years. He was born in Gaul, to a family that spoke a language Rome never fully erased. He served 25 years in a legion that carried him from Britain to the Danube and back. On discharge, he received land, citizenship, and a name, granted, not inherited, a name younger than the hills he now stood on. He marries locally. His children grow up bilingual. His grandchildren know only the Roman name, with no way of knowing it is younger than almost everything else that shaped them. Younger than the land, younger than the language their great-grandmother once spoke, younger than everything except the empire itself. 2,000 years later, a descendant finds that name in a record and assumes it means Rome. It means something quieter and more human than that. It means adaptation. Survival through transformation, not through purity. That is not a smaller story than the one people expected walking in. It's a larger one, because it suggests human history resists the straight lines we keep trying to draw through it. Populations don't move in single clean waves. They braid together, separate, reabsorb, vanish from written records and reappear centuries later inside a genome, the one archive that doesn't require anyone to have written anything down at all. scientists remain cautious about overstating any single finding here. Ancient DNA panels, however large, are still incomplete, and regional variation across the former empire was significant. Conclusions drawn from burials near Rome don't automatically apply evenly to every province the empire once held. But the broader pattern, cultural identity spreading further and faster than genetic ancestry, has held up across multiple independent lines of evidence, from Y chromosome studies to autosomal comparisons to direct ancient genome sequencing. If your family carries one of these old Roman names, the DNA isn't asking you to give up that inheritance. It's asking you to understand it differently, not as an unbroken bloodline stretching to a single ancient city, but as a mark left by one of the most complex systems humans ever built, a system that spread identity far faster and far wider than it ever spread blood. The legions are gone. The roads have crumbled or vanished under newer ones. But the names remain, carried by families who, in most cases, share no direct genetic line to the city that gave those names their shape, and who are, in a much deeper sense, exactly what Rome always was underneath its own myth, a convergence of peoples, wearing one name, carrying many histories quietly inside it. If this kind of story stays with you, subscribe, because the deeper the evidence goes, the more the map keeps changing. The name was never the whole story. It was only ever the surface. Beneath it, the genome remembers what the record book chose to forget.